Hello everyone, my name is AJ, and I don't have a good intro. Today I'm going to attempt to redesign Belphegore for my AU Heckuva boss, which is set in the Dark Ages. In the show, Belphegore has been mentioned once as having many drugs that Beelzebub steals, and she's also appeared as a background character in the Mastermind episode. However, she's designed to look a lot more like Baphomet than Belphegore. Baphomet famously has a goat head with a candle on it, and Belphegore does not. According to my research, Belphegore is a shapeshifter. His true form is described as having leathery flesh, large horns, long sharp teeth and fingernails, and a big mouth. The form he usually takes when he is not himself is a beautiful naked woman to tempt mortals with, which honestly seems more like lust, but alright. Belphegore is supposed to be a kind of inventor and is usually invoked by people looking to find wealth, fame, and fortune through as little effort as possible. By just handing people success, he makes people dependent on him so that he can sabotage them and prevent them from ever bettering their lives. Normally, I try to be fairly accurate to the source material with my depictions of named demons, but I didn't feel like doing that this time. I actually had a specific idea in mind. I remember I once read that both Beelzebub and Belphegore are associated with the Canaanite god Baal, also known as Hadad, the god of storms and fertility, and Baal, by the Lesser Key of Solomon. According to researchers, it's safe to assume that all three are the same entity, which is what I've gone with for my depiction, but more on that later. For right now, though, the most important thing to know is that Baal is the second parent of both Beelzebub and Belphegore. When I was drawing, I actually started by drawing Belphegore's female disguise, but I'd rather start by talking about Belphegore's main form. I had always pictured Belphegore as being the only quadrupedal sin, even in his usual form. When I think of the sin of laziness, I think of a really old and really spoiled dog, and that was what I always had in my head. So since the real description of Belphegore is so lackluster, and I've already decided that he and Beelzebub are twins, I decided to make him a wolf. Though this is his main form, it's also technically sort of the demon form, but only by technicality. Demon forms are the true forms of the sins. Switching into this form is easy. To do it, all you have to do is abandon all higher reasoning, intelligence, planning, and the fear of consequences. In this form, you are no longer a person. You become little more than an animal, slave to fleeting desires. You become the embodiment of your temptations, completely free of all heavenly restrictions put in place to keep animals, humans, deities, and monsters alike from hurting themselves. A huge reason why demons are so dangerous is because they don't follow any of God's rules at all. Organization, consistency, science, and logic were gifted to the universe by God himself. Humans, monsters, animals, and plants are incapable of completely disobeying them. Only demons and deities assisted by demonic influence can commit sins against nature. That's why so many demons are shapeshifters and why shapeshifters are always demonic. If someone stays in their demon form for too long, they will be completely consumed by it. They will get stuck in that body forever. They will become nothing more than a dumb animal, incapable of doing anything that does not serve their most prominent sin, which often ends in death. Belphegore is unique amongst his siblings. His demon form is as close to harmless as a demon can get. He can only hurt people that are close to him simply because he is too lazy to chase you. Why does he spend so much of his time in this form then if it doesn't benefit him at all? It's because he's lazy. He wants to expend as little energy as possible, and his demon form, ironically, compared to the other forms of all of his other siblings, actually expends less energy than his other form. He also spends a lot of time sleeping, which repairs the mental state. He also chooses not to think beyond the capacities of an animal when he is awake in this form, which also prevents his brain from snapping. So long as he turns back for a day or two every year, he'll be fine. He usually does this by accident. He'll have a dream of some incredible invention, and overcome with inspiration, he'll switch back long enough to get it started, but never actually finish it. Sloth, like pride, is a supplementary sin. All sins come from pride initially, and then are aggravated further by both sloth and pride. That's why we have two sins of pride. Belphegore acts like the water in the soup. He pairs up with one or more sins to bring out the worst in people. Sinners whose only sin are sloth are incredibly rare. They almost always have more than one. Belphegore pairs best with gluttony and greed. He works well enough with lust and pride. Envy and wrath not quite as much, because those ones take inherently, by their nature, more work to commit. His relationships with his fellow sins function much the same way. He's closest with Beelzebub more than anyone else. She did try to eat him, but they're homies now. Though he seems like the least dangerous of the sins, he's actually one of the most effective long-term attempting sinners. He lulls people into a false sense of security so that they stop making an active effort to be good, which makes them ripe targets for the other sins. His influence is almost entirely invisible, but it's responsible for the fall of nations. As far as his personality goes, he's fairly inoffensive. He's a big lazy dog. He's very easy to get along with. He gets along very well with most of his siblings. The only two that don't like him are Behemoth, who finds him dull, and Leviathan, who's deeply jealous that he barely has to lift a finger to keep his spot on the list. Belphegore only cares peripherally about the list. He doesn't really care to be at the top of the list, but he doesn't want to be at the bottom either, and he never has. Since he very rarely tempts mortals to hell by himself, he'll never get to the top unless those above him mess up significantly. But since he plays such an important role in helping out the others, he gets participation credit. He's usually in the lower middle of the list. As far as design goes, I tried to make sure that he didn't look cute. Wolves and dogs are very cute, and when they're not, they usually look very elegant. I went out of my way to make him look as ugly as possible. I made his snout very long and drooped down with some crookedness to it. I also put a clear separation between the nose and mouth, which I don't usually do with my designs beyond a line to indicate where the mouth is. Beyond that, I mostly followed the female design that I already did, just translating it from furry to animal. Speaking of which, let's get over that. This was the one that I started with because I was struggling to draw animals that day. I found an overhead laying down pose that I really liked and used that to jump off of. My idea was to take Beelzebub's maskless form, give it a slightly different body type, and give it a big blanket. Since Beelzebub is partially African, I was thinking about dreadlocks, and I was also thinking about a wolf in sheep's clothing for fairly obvious reasons. This somehow led me to think about those mop dogs, whatever they're called, and I looked at them and I was like, hey, their hair is the same shape as how I usually draw dreadlocks. That's pretty cool. So I used that as a reference. When I draw dreads, I usually draw every single individual strand, but I chose not to do that this time. It takes a lot of work to style dreadlocks, and I don't think Belphegore would do this. I think he'd have his servants do it for him while he's sleeping, but you know, still. So what I decided to do was to give his hair the silhouette of dreads and put some definition of the strands without going all the way like I usually do. I usually put a lot of texture into the hair too, but I decided not to do that this time to make it look extra soft and snuggly. I didn't completely abandon everything about Hasbin's Belphegore. I did use her as a reference. I snatched her neck thing. I was going to draw it with the same sharpness, but it clashed with the way that I did the hair, so I changed it to be nice and soft too. The female disguise that Belphegore is described with is supposed to be naked, so for clothes, I thought that I would go the Pokemon route, where it doesn't actually have clothes, the fur just kind of looks like that. So what I did was I made the fur really long around the neck and chest area to make it look kind of like a cloak, and everything else would be shaved down. I also extended the hair in the back so that it flows right into the blanket so you can't tell the difference. For colors, I started with a very light bluish gray for all the hair. I snatched a purpley brown from the OG, but I didn't like it and switched it out for a dark blue. I also snatched a blue from Hasbin's Belphegore, but left it the way it was this time. Since this design is so simple and naked, I wanted to give it some patterning to spice it up a bit, and I actually decided to steal that from Hasbin's Beelzebub. My Beelzebub does have patterning on her fur in her kitsune form, but you can't see it because she's covered in clothes, so I thought it would be a good idea to give Belphegore the same patterning so you know what it looks like. I think that it also really works because Vivzi's version of Belphegore has little spots on the ears, so that combined with like the weird little spots on the legs, I think tied together very cohesively. Belphegore is supposed to have big horns, but I kind of forgot about that and I didn't want to go back and fix it, so henceforth and forever, it shall be known that the historian that was recording his design mistook his real ears for horns. That, or maybe I'll fix it in a future video. I don't know, I don't care. So then I zoomed out and I realized what I had drawn was very blatantly a furry, more than any other character I've designed for this universe, and I felt nothing but shame. I made the spots on his tail look kind of like a skull in hopes that embracing the camp would make me feel better. It didn't. And it's too late now. Everything's ruined. I drew a wolf furry femboy trap. Belphegore is not gender fluid. He gets joy out of pretending to be a girl so he can jump scare people with his deep voice. Anyway, I gave him wing shards on his elbows, ankles, and wrists so that he would look a little bit more like Lucifer, which did make me feel a teeny tiny bit better, and he was all done. We interrupt this program to announce that this video is sponsored by me! Go look at my Etsy and Ko-fi accounts. There's Halloween merchandise, which is only available from now until October 31st. After that, it is gone. We also have Lucifer's sketchbook for you artists in my audience, which will appear as an in-universe item. We also have a few jackets for closeted queers and a plethora of keychains and pins. Everything is print on demand, so get it sooner rather than later if you want it to be on time. Buy it! Buy it! Buy it now! Now we circle back to Baal. Baal started as Hadad, the Mesopotamian god of storms, making him a deity. For anyone who might have missed this in my Behemoth video, deities are created by a large group of human beings collectively believing in a false individual enough to worship them. Creation, world building, and storytelling are all godly traits, and humans are created in his image. Thus, they were blessed with minor control over life and death. But if a large enough group of humans come together, say that something exists, and truly believe that it does, a deity will spawn. Deities are very powerful, but they have a lot of limitations. Their power is directly tied to human belief. If their followers stop believing in them or believe them to be weak, they will grow weak and can be killed or even just straight up die. Baal understood this better than many other deities. He was famously humiliated by the real god. The prophet Elijah had a competition with the prophets of Baal to prove which god was real, Baal or Jehovah. They made an altar and a sacrifice to their god and asked them to send fire to consume it. Baal couldn't do it. God's fire ate up even the stones of the altar. That was when reality set in for Baal. He realized that day that he wasn't a real person. He wasn't a god. He was a slug in someone else's garden, and he would either be killed or forgotten if he didn't do something. So he made a deal with Lucifer to become a demon. He would be weaker as a demon, yes, but he would be immortal and near unkillable. In exchange, Lucifer asked only for his loyalty and the first 2 children that he birthed. Baal agreed to this immediately.
Good thing I am a guy and can't not get pregnant.
No, you are wrong,
said the impregnator guy.
Baal thought he was getting such a good deal, but nah. He mistakenly agreed to be one of Lucifer's concubines. Lucifer is responsible for creating the bodies of all demons. For hell-born and hell creatures, this means that they're descended from him directly. For sinners, this means that he designs them like an artist. Baal is a bit of a unique case since he's not a sinner, but is a demon. Lucifer had only limited control over what he would look like, so he gave him a few extra bull traits, an extra set of arms, and a womb. So how do these two together create the Lord of the Flies and a very stinky wolf? When them combined, like, their kids don't look anything like either of them. Simple. They disobeyed the laws of biology by getting a man pregnant, and then that man went on to lay eggs, which he's even more not supposed to be able to do. The only offspring that can come from such disobedience of scientific rules will be shapeshifters, the greatest insult to biology possible. Baal laid quite a few eggs, but the only 2 of his children that survived were Beelzebub and Belphegor. Beelzebub hatched first and ate most of her siblings and every egg she could reach. Belphegor only survived because of his slothfulness. He was the first of his siblings to try to hatch, so his egg was moved away from the others. He didn't finish hatching until several weeks later, though. It was too hard and he didn't want to, so he just went back to sleep. Somebody had to help him hatch. Baal was around during their childhoods, but like Lucifer, barely involved. He was busy weaseling himself into as many false religions as he could in a desperate grab for power. Beelzebub and Belphegor's main caretakers were enslaved nursemaids. Beelzebub took on many of the physical and cultural traits of their nurses, a kitsune and an adzi. Belphegor felt more connected to their hellhound. The last thing before we go, Baphomet. Since Vivzi used him as her main inspiration in her version of Belphegor, I thought it would be fun to include him in some way. The first mention of Baphomet that I was able to find came from the trials of 1307, where the Knights Templar were accused of worshipping Baphomet as a demonic idol. I could have made Baphomet a deity created by human imagination, but I thought it would be more fun if he was Belphegor's son. Belphegore does not bathe unless someone physically picks him up and puts him in water. His body is a biohazard. One day when he stood up, Baphomet dripped out of his blanket created by the merging of filth and bits of wool. Just like how all the 7 deadly sins come from pride, the devil, more specific sins come from the 7 deadly ones. The 7 deadly sins are perfectly normal human emotions and desires taken to extremes where they become harmful both to other people and to the sinner themselves. Someone might rob another person because they want their money, or they might do it because they're a kleptomaniac. Stealing, the exact same sin, depending on the nuance of the situation, might be either attributed to greed or gluttony. Different motivations, same outcome. Baphomet is a sin, though he's not one of the 7 deadly. Because his sin is so specific, he's not as powerful as the 7 deadly sins. Every human to ever live, with only a few exceptions, will feel the pull of all 7 deadly sins at some point in their life. Not even the most righteous are safe from temptation. The 7 deadly will try to get you to sin. Specific sins like Baphomet will try to get you to sin in specific ways. Baphomet tempts people to purposely misinterpret the meaning of scripture or their understanding of morality into something twisted and evil. Sometimes his influence corrupts just one family, sometimes it can blossom into large cults. At the time of Heckuva, he's still a baby, but he had to grow up fast. The reason why sloth is so bad is because it forces the people around you to have to take care of you. Because Belphegore refuses to take any responsibility for his own life and well-being, the parent-child dynamic has been inverted. Belphegore is more like Baphomet's pet than his parent. Anyway, regrettably, that's all I have for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I have merch, I take commissions, and an extra special thank you to my patrons, JRDS, CDN Redneck 05, Immortal Jesse, Not 3 Rats, Mercer Scott Holt, Stephen Drake, The Fun Guy, Chase Johnson, Honey, Jay Draws, and Silent Savvy. You're the greatest. Thank you again so much for watching, and don't forget about the biohazard that is the like button. Bye-bye!